Welcome to the show. It's time to unwind with Dave B and Dave D, the best brews you'll find. Craft beer talk, it's a passion we share. From hops to malts, we're taking you there. This is Daftaboutcraft, where the good times flow. Sit back and relax, let the flavors glow. Brews, news, and views, we've got it all right. Cheers to craft beer, let's raise it tonight.
Daftaboutcraft, the craft beer podcast.
Anybody fancy episode 76? This is Daftaboutcraft, the craft beer podcast with me, Dave D.
And me, Dave B.
Feels like a long time since we sat in this seat. In fact, last time it was sweltering outside. Now it's freezing cold. I can barely feel my toes and I just want to drink lots of stout.
It hasn't really been by design, has it? Unfortunately, there's been bits and bobs going on in the background that has slowed us. You've been busy, as normal, because it's just been coming to the end of beer festival season, but actually it's been, sadly, not fun beer stuff that's got in the way, hasn't it? I've job upheaval once again, which happened this time last year for regular listeners, and then also, on a personal note, we lost our dog Otto quite suddenly, which made me not really fancy talking about beer for a week or so.
And completely understandable. And regular listeners to the pod, especially in the early days, will remember Otto because he often used to pop up, especially when there was cheese or biscuits or anything around.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, he did. When I used to record in a different room to where I do it now, he would used to sort of sometimes come along and say hello, and he'd come on the camera, wouldn't he, and say hello to you as well. Yeah, he's left a bit of a hole, unfortunately, but let's not dwell on that too much and instead focus on what we've got for the latest episode.
Which is lots and lots of really great content. While we have been away and not with you, we have recorded lots of interviews. The first one of those is with the brewery that's been going for a long time, but we knew nothing about, Great Newsom on the east coast of Britain.
Yes, Matt got in touch with us saying, would you like to talk to another brewery that are sort of self-sustaining? And we said, yes, of course, because it seems to be a bit of a recurring theme. And we found out an awful lot, because Matt was very open. The brewery started not necessarily as a passion project. It started as a sideline to the successful working farm they have, but it's become very successful in its own right, to the point that they took on the recipes from another brewery. And also, as you say, the east coast of Yorkshire, which also has reached into Sweden and northern Italy.
Yeah, there's lots of eye-opening moments, including a story about a pork pie, which made me laugh as well. So stay tuned for that. That's Great Newsom Brewery. We've also got Ben from Sober Boozers Club. He'll be popping up with his latest recommendations for beers you might want to try on the lower end of the ABV scale. We've got a little interview with London Brewers Alliance, and we've got tried and tested, all the usual bits and pieces, but we will kick off, as we always do, with Brew to Me, where we road test a beer from a brewery we've never sampled before. Over to you, Dave. Where are you taking us?
I'm taking us in another one of my collabs of influences from elsewhere with Britain, which I'll get to. But I just wanted to say before we crack on with that, if people are listening to all that, and there is an awful lot of interviews and an awful lot of content, and thinking, no hype or tripe, nothing like that at the end, don't worry, we have you covered. We are fully aware that when this comes out, it's right in the height of every Tom, Dick and Harry doing Oktoberfest, not only with their beers, but also you can't seem to move for your local brew tap, pub, etc., having an Oktoberfest event. And we have got hold of some fest beers because they are everywhere. Everyone is doing them. And we'll just road test a couple of them and just have a bit of a general chat about fest beers, etc. But that'll be a small special, which we will aim to get out in the next couple of weeks on top of this episode. Returning to Brew to Me, this has been a long time in the offing because Toby from Anglo Oregon sent these beers out a little while ago and then unfortunately has been the victim of the delays that we've talked about already. But so Anglo Oregon Brewing Company in Newport. I'm in Wales, Dave, and you don't know these people, which is very unusual.
What's going on?
Been around since 2015. Very small though, nano. Toby will tell us just how small. As the name suggests, there is an American and British combination going. And as Toby also tells us, what he likes to brew as dark beers. And if he had his way, he would just sit and brew dark beers all the time. So he sent me 4. And the one that I said, which would you like me to talk about, or which do you want to talk about, is the standard smoked porter, which weighs in at 7%. Now, I love a smoked beer, so I'm quite excited. I've been eyeing these up for quite a long time, but no, I haven't been able to try them. And this has been sitting at room temperature for a couple of days now. I got it out at the start of the week, and it's poured with no head whatsoever. It comes out like engine oil. Not heavily smoky nose. It is smoky, but it wouldn't be, say, as heavy as Schlenkerla for Rauch beers and things like that. Does not taste like 7%.
It's going to be a good episode when you kick off with a 7% beer that doesn't taste like 7%.
The smokiness is actually more pronounced in taste than it is smell, and it lingers. It actually really lingers. Off one sip, that's getting more and more intense. It's not doing anything different than what it says it will do. It is a porter, so it's a bit malty, dark, and then there's a smokiness on top. You'd have pints of this in front of the open fire and be very happy. Nice, simple sort of up and down beer for me.
If you had pints of that, you'd be asleep.
Well, yeah, very true. There would be that problem. But just to sort of give you a quick idea before I hand over to Toby. So there's this beer, which is sort of the straight one. Then there's also another porter, which is a collaboration, which I've also got. There's a stout, which is 7.4% called Frost, which I know I've got. And then there is one more, which is an IPA. Now, I might have that as well. I'm not sure, which is 6.1%. Doesn't really do weak beers.
They're starting to sound to me a little bit in the realms of Torside, who love dark smoked beers.
Yeah, I wouldn't put you off that comparison. That's quite reasonable, actually, because these have come in bottles as well. There's no adjunct stuff going on here. It is just beer that is smoky.
You've opened the door. We haven't done a top rants for a while. Can I do a top rants?
Go for it.
It was the word adjunct that did it.
I might be able to chime in on this. Go for it.
Right, so I did a food and beer pairing tasting with Sean. He's got a little business going up near Preston, and he does one of these tastings every month, and really enjoyed it. Really great. But one of the beers was some Azvex, right? And it was one of these big coloured gloopy beers, which regular listeners to the podcast will know over the years I've quite enjoyed, especially from the likes of Vault City. Anyway, we were there. There was me, Lisa, an English beer gentleman was with us as well. And we were trying these beers, and we just happened to look at the back of the can for this Azvex beer. Suddenly noticed no hops. The ingredients are on there. There's no hops in there. Okay, it's a big fruity sour. Maybe we can just about get away with that. Look a bit closer. Then there's E numbers in there. Now, this really got on my wick because E numbers should not be in beer. This is ultra-processed liquid we now drink in here, not beer. And it really, really got on my wick. There's no need for it, is there?
No, and funnily enough, you told me this story and I said to you, well, what is it then? Can it actually be described as beer? Because if no hops are involved in the process, are we even talking about beer anymore? And funnily enough, Hopsters have just opened their new shop in Bury St Edmunds. And this is no knock on Hopsters because you put in what sells. And funnily enough, they took a picture of what sort of opening night, or pictures of opening night. And one of the beers was the latest Azvex thing, which is this bright blue, like flubber or something. And I just sort of thought, I don't want to put that. I wouldn't anyway because it wouldn't float my boat, but I don't want to put that in my body. Like, it just looks horrible.
Well, I've asked a few brewers about the processes involved in making these beers since I came across this. In fact, I was in the tap room at Bianca Road in London just last week, talking to Terry, one of the partners there, and he gave me an orange-coloured sour. And the first thing I said to him, mate, there is no E numbers in this, is there? Please tell me there's no E numbers. No, there's hops. There's no E numbers. Sure, there's fruit puree in there. So you can do it.
It's how sours and everything started, wasn't it? We've had people on the podcast where they sort of go, we had to get X ton of fruit to make this taste like this. That's fine. That's naturally occurring. But an E number isn't natural.
You see, the trouble is with these silly beers that barely pour out of the can when you turn the can upside down, they need stabilizers in there and thickening agents and all this sort of stuff. But maybe I've changed. Probably at one time I'd have embraced that, but it's just getting on my nerves now. It's moving further and further away from beer. And I just don't like it. It's not for me.
Stabilizers for kids learning to ride their bikes. For me, I don't see that they have any place in beer personally. Like, and that's not to say, I want every beer to be a best bitter or something really traditional. There's no need for that. There's plenty of things you can do with fruit, as you say, and use of chocolate and how you can put all that in a beer and everything. Fine, but an E number is an artificial construct, and that to me has no place. But anyway, we digress.
So your beer, you're enjoying it.
I am. We should let Toby tell us a bit more about Anglo Oregon first before we get to your beer.
Toby here from Anglo Oregon Brewing Company in Newport, South Wales. The smoked porter we make, two versions, but the version I want to talk about is our first one is the straightforward smoked porter made with mostly Maris Otter pale malt, but then with some Rauch malt, beechwood smoked malt from Bamberg in Germany. Just a lovely stout, 7%, and very smooth. A little bit of chocolate and coffee undertones as well. I just love it. It's really my favorite beer that we make. I like all the dark ones we make, the two smoked porters and the frost stout and the Brinker stout. Could do nothing else. I would just make really strong dark beers. In terms of the brewery, it's very small. It's nano scale. It's just a 100-liter system and brew once a month or so. Could do about 700 bottles in a day. Bottle everything, and it's all bottle conditioned. And our focus is just celebrating the history and heritage of Newport and the surrounding area. So all the beers we make play on certain features or aspects of the history and heritage around here. I just love brewing. It's just a little side business I have, and it's been a little commercial brewery for about 10 years now, and it's a lot of fun. And we ship all throughout the UK. I had a look on Untapped, and it's the 7th highest rated brewery in Wales. So it's people really like the dark beers we make, and some of the IPAs too. Anyway, I hope you enjoy it, and good luck.
So there we go. That's a little bit more about Anglo Oregon. As Toby says, it's very much on the small side of things, and they seem very happy doing that. But if they want to keep putting out more beer like this beer, I will happily keep drinking it and would recommend them to other people as well. Big thumbs up from me, and I'm looking forward to trying the rest of my beers that they kindly sent me.
Excellent. That's a good start to the podcast. Well, having said that, I've started sort of clamouring for the darker beers like yourself now as the days get shorter and colder. I've got a session IPA, but that's fine. And this is from Blondie's Brewery in London. Blondie's, who were established in 2015, so have been going for 10 years. Ever heard of them?
Nope.
So this is what we love, isn't it? Just getting hold of these breweries that we don't know much about. Very simple black can with a logo on it. I don't think they actually can much beer, to be honest. I think mainly they've got a tap room and it goes through there and other places down in the south.
I think this is kind of the point we're getting to now, isn't it? Where we're finding these people who have a small amount of stock on site and possibly in the local area, if at all, and that's it. If you're canning nationwide, etc., we probably have heard of you. Although that said, you watch the next episode, it'll be two breweries that do that, which we hadn't heard of. So,
well, this has pulled out a lovely light straw-like colour. Nice big head, but that's down to me as usual. Oh, that's very easy drinking. That is nice. That is 5%. Did just have a little look on their website, actually. There are no cans available on their website. They've got loads of merch on there, though. T-shirts, hoodies, caps, anything you can think of. It's all on there, but no beer. It may be that this is one for when you're down in London and you happen to see it. I think they pour at a few venues down there. And one of the guys involved in it is Milo. Now, do you remember Milo? He was Mammoth. That's right. But it's interesting, isn't it? Once you're involved in that scene, you sort of move around and breweries close and you go somewhere else. I was at an event just recently down in London, and there was some Blondie's beer pouring there, actually. It was at Birdhouse Brewery. They'd got a little beer festival going on in conjunction with the London Brewers Alliance, which you'll hear more about later. And there were some Blondies on there, actually. It was all London-based breweries there. There were so many breweries in London and the South East. I think 60, 70, 80 breweries, which is incredible when you think about it.
It is, but then at the same time, you'd be surprised if there wasn't, if you've got London going in, with the capital. But there should be, but at the same time, I know what you mean.
Population, whatever it is, 7 million now. There's plenty of people there to support it. I'll tell you what, Dave, that beer is actually really, really good. Not a trace of bitterness to it. Lovely and light. really sessionable, which is what it is supposed to be. So yeah, big thumbs up for Blondies.
Daftaboutcraft, powered by Craft Brew Festival.
Well, hello there, gentlemen. For those of you listening to the Daftaboutcraft podcast who might not know who I am, my name is Ben Gibbs and I run an online platform called the Sober Boozers Club. I'm a self-confessed alcoholic. I've been sober now for 3.5 years, and in my sobriety, I've committed my entire life, really, to the discovery and enjoyment of low and no alcohol beers. Bit of context on low alcohol versus no alcohol. In the UK, legally, non-alcohol is 0.0%. I think it's actually 0.05%, but most of these beers come in at 0.0%. They can be called alcohol-free. Low alcohol beers, on the other hand, are 0.5%. Now, I call these beers alcohol-free because they can't physically intoxicate you. You would drown before getting drunk off them. Your body metabolizes alcohol quicker than it takes a 0.5% beer to get into your system. In fact, a ripe banana can be 0.5%, brioche bread can be 1.2%, etc. So, alcohol-free beer, when I talk about it, is primarily beer at 0.5%. The chaps have kindly invited me on to talk a little bit about what I've been up to in the world of alcohol-free beer. We caught up in January, I think, off the top of my head, so it's been a little while, and it seems like it's just going from strength to strength. I'm finding alcohol-free beer in places that I never expected to find it. I was in North Devon, and I went to Porlock, which is a quaint little town. It's actually just below the steepest A road in the country. So that is a nightmare to drive to. And I stumbled upon this pub, and on the front door it said, CAMRA Somerset 2025 Pub of the Year. Historically, for me, that would have meant, right, I'm not going to get anything here, because CAMRA is, real ale. And when you think real ale, you don't really think about alcohol-free beer. I got into the pub. I had a look in the fridge, as I always do, and I saw a bottle of San Miguel, and I thought, do I want this, or am I just going to have a glass of Coke, because Coca-Cola's fine. And then I just perused the taps, out of habit really, to see what beers they had on. And I was shocked to see an alcohol-free beer on tap. It was from Butcombe, it's their Gorham IPA, and it was a fantastic pint. The line was definitely well maintained. It kept its head. It didn't taste off or foul as some alcohol-free beers do on tap. It was just a really good pint. And that kind of cemented, for me, the fact that these pubs are evolving, because alcohol-free beer doesn't have to replace alcoholic beer, nor should it. And alcohol-free beer shouldn't replace the pub environment, because I don't think pubs need to become wellness bars. That's nonsense. I love beer and I love pubs for what they are and what they represent. All alcohol-free beer does is creates a space that is open for everyone. I talked about this on a panel event at the Great British Beer Festival, also hosted by CAMRA, and they actually had an exclusively alcohol-free bar, which again was wild. And when I think about alcohol-free beer and the pub, I think there is so much potential there. It can unlock, once again, the sacred lunchtime pint that seems to not be appropriate anymore for some reason. Alcohol-free beer makes that accessible, and it makes it acceptable again. It opens up these spaces for people that maybe would avoid pubs at certain times of the year or at certain times of the day because they don't feel like consuming alcohol. If you can have a great pint of beer in any pub in the country, alcoholic or alcohol-free, I think that's only a good thing. So, what have I been into lately? That is a very good question, to be honest, because, as I say, there are so many really good alcohol-free beers. Daya have been releasing regular alcohol-free beer, which I'm loving. We Can Be Friends, of course, championing the alcohol-free beer IPA space in the UK. Nolia, aka Beak, who released Nolia, which is a separate brand, coming along and making a pretty solid alcohol-free beer. I have to say, I'm not a fan of the alcohol-free beer fixed branding. I think that was relevant maybe 3 years ago when the concept first came into their brains. But now I don't think it needs to be fixed. I just think it needs to be accessible. And they are doing that. And as I say, it's a very good beer, so props to them. What I've really been into recently are Polish beers. There's a company called Polish Craft Beers, and they are importing some incredible craft beer from Poland into the UK. And they sent me a mixed case of alcohol-free beer. And my goodness, it just blew me away. The beers that they are making are incredible. And something that I love is they label whether the beer has been pasteurized or not. Now, with full alcohol stuff, I don't think it's that important because alcohol obviously is very good at killing contaminants and it's very good at stabilizing a beer. Alcohol-free beer, if it hasn't been pasteurized, I will drink it. But I want to know, because I want to know where I'm storing it. I want to know if I need to drink it quickly or if I can leave it for a little while. Pasteurization is a really good thing for alcohol-free beer because it gets rid of all the nasties, it stabilizes it, it means that you can drink it after its best before date and not worrying about needing to run to the toilet or any of that business. I think all breweries should label their alcohol-free beer, pasteurized or unpasteurized. I don't think we should ever force a brewery to pasteurize because it's expensive, but I think as a consumer, we have a right to know. And I really love that. That small thing is really important once you know. And I love that about Polish beer. And as I say, the liquid was just incredible. I think my favorite is from a brewery. Oh, this is from memory now. They're called Browa Gzub. And I can't for the life of me remember the name of the beer, but it translates to breeze. It was an IPA and it was just so good. Like, I can't even describe how good it was. So they've been really good. I also found a German supermarket. Now, it's a German supermarket that are in the USA, but they will post to the UK. But I'm talking like proper German stuff. Like stuff you can't buy from websites in the UK. Stuff you can't buy anywhere in the UK. I've never seen some of these beers. One of them I got was Franziskaner, which I have missed so much. It was the first German beer that I fell in love with as an alcoholic. Well, I wasn't an alcoholic then, but to see that alcohol-free was, it was amazing. Nostalgia in a bottle. They had like the Grolsch-esque bottles, you know, with the rubber strap locks, or you can use them for your guitar as strap locks when you take it off. But German beer, German alcohol-free beer is so good, and they've had a long time to perfect it because they've been doing this stuff for years, and they've been doing a really good job of it for years. Anyway, that was pretty cool. I think they're just called German Food Shop. And they do they do full alc beers? I don't think they do, actually. I think that was for one thing, you couldn't get any alcoholic beer there. But that's opened my eyes again to German beer. I go through phases of loving German beer, and then I've had enough German beer, and then I move on to other things. But I got a pack from Beer Hunter. They had Maisel's Weiss, which is one of the finest alcohol-free beers of all time. And while we're talking European beers, Omnipollo released an incredible stout. I think it's a pecan stout, and it's just brilliant. It's so good. Stouts like that, alcohol-free, are often disappointing because you smell them and they smell delicious. Like, you could sell candles that don't smell as good as some of these alcohol-free stouts. Then you taste them, it's just thin and disappointing. This one wasn't. It lived up to the aroma. It was creamy, it was sweet, it was stouty, rich, a little bit bitter, smoky almost. Like, I've only had one can of it and it's stuck with me that much. I just love it. Another new addition to the world of alcohol-free beer is, well, you couldn't really be in a more different ballpark if you tried. Estrella Damm have released an alcohol-free beer. Now, the rumour is that this is replacing Freedom in supermarkets and elsewhere. And I was a little bit miffed about that because I love a can of Freedom. Like, it's a go-to supermarket lager that is inoffensive, it's perfectly smashable, and you just know what you're going to get, and I like that. But this stuff is possibly even better. It comes in a big can, which makes a difference. It comes in a 4-pack, again, makes a difference. and it was just really good. A really solid supermarket offering. So now in the supermarkets, we're seeing free, really solid beers in Estrella Damm, in Proper Job, and in Guinness. That's a beer for every kind of drinker, alcohol-free, that is perfectly palatable. I mean, Proper Job is up there with the best of the best. I could hold that alongside a really, really good craft beer and possibly reach for Proper Job more often than not, because it's just an incredible beer. But to have a good lager and a good stout, I mean, we all know that Guinness is good. For me, I think it's actually a little bit overrated. Like, don't get me wrong, it's very good, but I've had better. But then that's me, because I'm obsessed with alcohol-free beer. In short, the world of alcohol-free beer is ever growing and ever improving. I've been really focusing on European beers lately, apparently, but I've had some incredible beers from the UK as well. You know, Shiny Brewery comes to mind. They released a really good beer, but there's literally hundreds more since we last spoke that are just coming up, getting drunk, and being enjoyed by not just me as well. I'm seeing more and more people talking about this stuff online, which is just, it warms my little heart, to be honest, because it was a lonely place 3.5 years ago. So I'm going to be here. I'm going to be drinking all the alcohol-free beer that the world can throw at me. I'm going to keep promoting it, keep plugging it, keep talking about it, and hopefully keep seeing it thrive.
This is Daftaboutcraft, the craft beer podcast. Daftaboutcraft, you're tuned to your favorite beer podcast.
Well, on recent episodes of Daftaboutcraft, we have heard from Coldframe in Cornwall. We've heard from Ideal Day in Cornwall, and they're both family-run with a big emphasis on the farming aspect. And we've got another brewery that fits into that category now. This is Great Newsom Brewery, and we're speaking to director Matthew. Welcome to the podcast, Matthew.
Evening, gentlemen.
Well, thanks for joining us. You actually contacted us. We always love it when a brewery gets in touch with us and says, can I come on and talk about the brewery? It makes our day, doesn't it, Dave?
It does, and the way you framed it as well, saying would there be room to talk to a farm-based brewery on the podcast, and we thought, well, yeah, of course there is. So we'd sort of love to hear a bit more about how the two sort of work together and how it's all come to pass.
I think it's one of those things where you're looking for a new podcast to listen to, and I think the COVID boost of podcasts, I've never really heard of that. I've continued to listen to more and more, and that's where you guys have. I heard you, and I thought, oh, that's really interesting. So I wanted to see if we could have a chat. Yeah, and here we are.
Absolutely. Well, welcome along. So you've been going since 2007, which always amazes us because that's a long time and we know nothing about you, really.
If you look where we are geographically, we are in the far east of East Yorkshire, about 3 miles from the North Sea, and really we're on a spit of land called Holderness, and unless you deliberately came out this way, you would never come across or drive past the brewery. We are just very much in the middle of nowhere, so, you know, that's probably one reason why you've probably not heard of us. We originally looked at starting a brewery in 1999. We did a feasibility study. We were looking to start another business on the farm, family farming business, wanted to look at the future really and look at other businesses that we could make sure that there was an additional income for the rest of the family should they wish to be here. I farmed with my brother. My father was still very much involved at the time. I had a young family and my brother was looking to get married, and so we thought, well, we could start something. And we did a feasibility study in 1999 to convert an old farm building. And actually, at the end of that study, it became quite apparent that it was going to cost far more than we thought it would. And because of where we are, there was so few places to sell the beer that we decided to leave it. But no one who's niggled away at us. And Mum and Dad, when we were kids, never took us on holiday abroad. I think they did once, actually, but typically it was in the southwest, and whereas around here you'd get Tetley's, John Smith's. That was about the variety of beer that was around here. A little brewery, I suppose, at the time. So we'd go down the southwest and they'd tick off all the different beers that they would try down there. And that's sort of something that always stuck with us, that love of beer. So we came back to it in 2005, 2006. When things were starting to shift then, there was a growth of small breweries, and that local food and drink aspect was starting to take off. And around here we were starting to see a number of some of Tide pubs being bought as freeholds, and that was opening up a bit of a market, and it sort of went from there, really.
I think you've covered it slightly there, but it sounds like it was business, but it was business founded on a bit of a love of beer. I was just wondered whether it was purely a commercial thing of we need to find a way to sort of get something else going on the farm, or was there always sort of a deep-seated love of beer that ran through the family and you sort of had a bit of history with it and then you wanted to carry it on?
Yeah, good point. And I would be lying if I didn't say that it was never a passion project in terms of, something that we wanted to do. It was something that had to commercially work. So, we were always going to look at something that was going to produce a beer that was going to sell. That said, there was at the back of our minds this something telling us that making beer was the thing to do because of what our parents had done with us. They were very supportive. Dad had been a member of Camera, and he had done a little bit of home brewing, but I had very little experience in it. And so, yeah, it had to stand on its own 2 feet. We were lucky to get a rural development grant, but we had a 5-year plan. And if after 5 years it hadn't been commercially successful, it wasn't working, then we'd have called it a day. We'd have paid off the small startup loan that we've got, and we'd have looked elsewhere. But things changed, and it did work, and we are still here. But yeah, we are passionate about our beer, so that makes me sound like we're not, but we very much are. But in the first instance, it was something that had to be a business, and it had to eventually make money.
That was the sort of start of it all, and obviously things did go well, because here we are talking 18 years later. With the brewing side of things, who have you sort of self-taught? Did you go off and sort of seek advice? How's it all come together as a setup then?
My brother and I originally worked together and looking at the project and how it would work. Can't remember for what reason, but I ended up looking at the brewing side and taking on running that side of things. So we did seek additional help. We used a consultant based in Lincolnshire who was very experienced in the brewing sector, and he came along and helped us. And I went up to the brew lab in Sunderland, and at that time, I think the course was about a week long, did that. The slight bombshell that we had a little bit was that about 3 weeks before we'd planned to start buying equipment or sourcing equipment, the gentleman who was our consultant announced he was going to move to Australia, and he was going the following week. So he dropped us in it a little bit. But on the back of that, we got to meet. There's a story. He'd been in court, and he'd been there as an expert witness in a case where some tanks in a brewery had failed. And the expert witness on the defence, the other side of the courtroom, they used to go out for a beer at lunchtime, and he got to know this other chap. And he said, when he announced he was going to Australia, he did say to us, well, I'll put somebody else in court, and I think he might be really good for you. And as on the result of that, we got to know a guy who had been in the brewing sector for many, many years. He was probably retirement age then. He built breweries, and he also knew lots of really good people. There's a guy called Steve Wellington who ran the museum brewery in Burton-on-Trent, only the old Victoria Tower Brewery, and we got to brew with him. And he gave us some really good basic principles of brewing. And the first one was keeping it simple. You're going to want to brew the same beer over and over again. Don't overcomplicate things, because consistency will go out the window and that sort of thing. So that's where we got the experience, and I became head brewer, if you like, and began brewing the beers from the start.
Love the way that worked out.
Steve Wellington was a huge character. He's retired now, and I think the brewery museums, but then certainly the Tower Brewery is no longer operated. But he was brilliant, and he very eccentric. I don't suppose you mind me saying eccentric gentleman who made brewing look really easy. And at that time, it was terrifying. How are you going to brew quantities of beer and make sure it's going to work every time? And the other thing that we were taught was we were going to use packet yeast, because there's lots of things to think about. And the guy who helped us who built the brewery for us, he said, no. He said, if you're going to want award-winning beers, you need real live yeast, and you need your own culture almost. And he put us in touch with another brewer not far from here. I rang this guy and said, we'd love some yeast from you. And he said, well, yeah, it's no problem. Just bring a sterile bucket along and you can have some. And I wanted to buy it off him. I said, you must want something. He said, no, there's no need for money to change hands. Or a bottle of whiskey or something. And in the end, I bought it for a pork pie. My mum was making pork pies, a small catering business in the kitchen, farmhouse kitchen. So I bought it with a pork pie. And after a week of brewing, we killed the yeast. It's probably after the first guy we killed it. So I went back with another pork pie, another bucket. And he was more than happy with that. He said, you can keep doing this as long as you like. But yeah, that's how sort of things got going, really. We got lots of really good contacts.
The yeast thing must have stuck with you, because I think, am I right in saying you actually have your own strain now? You've developed your own strain of yeast.
I think that's maybe stretching it a little far. I think it's that the yeast strain that we got, I'd love to say that was the case. And I have no doubt that strain that we got from the the original brewery was adapted to our methods and the way we brew, I have no doubt. And now we have it stored up in Sunderland at the Brew Labs yeast bank there. So, we always have that yeast there, but it's certainly adapted to our way of brewing. It's a very flocculent yeast. I've been trying to work out the history of it, and we think it possibly came from Worlds in Sheffield, so probably you brewed in Yorkshire Squares originally. But I still say it's the one thing that's given me the most sleepless nights over the years, and I still think it took us 12 years to master that yeast. Whereas now we look after it and it works reliably well. There's some times where I was in tears with the dough stuff. You can't live without it, but it can be very fickle. But now I think, now really sort of look after it well, and it's very reliable. We can trust it 100% nowadays.
I think you're the first person to ever talk about yeast challenges on this podcast. And it must happen to a lot of brewers, but nobody else ever mentions it, do they, Dave?
No, not really. And I guess you say it took 12 years. Has it got a bit easier more recently because of sort of technology and everything caught up and made your life easier? Or is it just it's a thing that it's quite unreliable, but you just have to take your time and get used to it, and it's various foibles, and after so long you now are on top of it?
Maybe part of it's that I don't do any brewing anymore. That's maybe part of it. Or certainly, should I say, our head brewer now actually happens to be my eldest son, who's now our head brewer and has been for the last 4 years. And really, I think the amount of detail now that we look at yeast and the way we treat it has probably helped develop that knowledge and understanding of it, knowing when to call on a fresh culture from the lab. So we will 3 times a year, possibly 2 or 3 times a year, get a fresh culture from the lab, just to make sure belt and braces that we're looking after things, and then really meticulously cropping it and being really careful with it, and also selecting which guile to take the very best yeast from. So we're really, really careful with that now. So the Swag Dust beer that we've got, which is our flagship, 3.8%, is perfect for cropping yeast off. So we have a couple of fermenters that they really suit cropping yeast off. And so now we're really being meticulous in the way that we crop from those batches and use that in the next generations. And that's probably really helped us.
So mentioned at the start, this was launched with a farm running alongside it. How do the two work together then?
This part of the world is not renowned for quality malting barley. We're on quite fertile land here, which ends up putting too much nitrogen in the barley, which it usually means that it doesn't qualify for malting. But through accidental flooding issues in the winter on some crops, we planted some spring barley a number of years ago and found that the quality could be there if we really were meticulous the way we looked after the crop. And then really it came a case of, if we can grow malting barley, who could malt barley, for us? And there's 2 maltings not too far from here. One of them wasn't particularly interested at the time. The other one was, or could be, but they only dealt in bulk. So at the time we were buying malt in 25 kilo sacks, but the only way that we could get malt back from them was in 25-ton bulk loads. But it turned out the guy who ran maltings put Flamborough, just up the coast. Actually, he was originated from not too far from us. And so we had a bit of a joke with him. And he said, if I can help you any way I can. And he did. And so now we send malting barley into Flamborough and we get malt back from there. Now, some years it might not always guarantee that it's ours, because the quality, it might be one of those years where quality is affected by the weather. It has to be blended. But the price that we pay for the malt is directly associated with what the farm sells the barley into the maltings for. So it works really well. And then the brewer's grains at the moment that are left over from brewing have fed to cattle on the farm, which my youngest son has. So we have that synergy and that connection. And to be honest, anything to do with branding on beer names, or there's usually some slight connection to farming along the lines, and that's our heritage, you see. So yeah, there's certainly a connection, and we're based on the farm. So, you're not too far from a tractor or a machine driving by when you're working in the brewery. So yeah.
So when you first started, what was the size of your very first kit?
So we bought a 10-barrel plant at the time. So what's that? 16 hectolitres, just over, a couple of fermenters, a couple of conditioning tanks. And I think typically at the start, we would maybe some weeks brew half a brew a week. At the beginning, I would be the brewer. I would be the salesperson, the debt collector, the delivery guy, everything rolled into one. The family members did help. And then as things progressed, as breweries do, you buy more fermenters, you buy more conditioning tanks as the business grows, and you start to take on employees. And really, that's how we started with a little 10-barrel kit that served us very well right through till 2020, actually. It did a lot of brewing by the time we moved it on.
The kit and everything has got bigger, and we've established it's gone well. But what was it like initially releasing beer into your part of the world? Because, Yorkshire, I guess back then would have been full of fairly traditional brewers, but maybe not a lot of choice. But you can't say that now.
First thing was that we would listen to what people wanted. And you're right, many of the pubs around us, so we're not far from the city of Hull, but a lot of the pubs we were dealing with initially were rural pubs. And the feedback we were getting was, don't brew beer too strong. And I think that for many years, 4.3% was about as strong as we went, really. But we listened to what people said, and one of the beers that you always have beers that inspire you. And I always remember at that time, Reefster's Yankee was a beer that was really different to a lot of other things that were out there. It was pale. It seemed hoppy at the time, but really refreshing. And I always remember, if you ever came across that, it was put a smile on your face. And so our original beers were probably inspired by that. And being a pale of sort of slap dust beer was our original brew, 3.8%. We call it a blonde now. We called it a pale at the time. And really, we did come across a little bit of opposition, and we put the first batch in about 6 different pubs locally. And after the weekend of them having it on the bar, we up them on the Monday, Tuesday to see what the feedback was like. Level whole, it was pretty good. Apart from one pub, and I rang them up, they said, so that was a beer. They said it was awful. It was awful. My bitter drinkers wouldn't drink it because it looked like lager. And my lager drinkers wouldn't drink it because it tasted like a bitter. And he said, I'll never have any beer off you again. And that point, actually, we still sell to that pub. The licensee's no longer there, it's been long gone. But that beer that they didn't like, those locals in there enjoy it now. So times have changed, even the hardened Yorkshire beer drinker has almost committed the cardinal sin and gone for something paler and hoppier. So, yeah, it was hard getting your foothold in the door, but we did listen to what people told us. It wasn't a case of brewing something because we wanted to brew it. It was brewing something because that's what our customers asked for. And that sort of, I think, has set us in good stead, through the hard times that have been in the last 18 years, the tough, go about COVID and that sort of thing. So I think those tough times have stood us in good stead because people now come to you and they know what your beer tastes like as much as you do, if not better than you do, because it's what they drink when they go down their local, So that's nice, when people are really quite passionate about what you produce.
So how far does your beer get then? Is it just within Yorkshire or does it go further afield as well?
Predominantly, our business is Yorkshire and North Lincolnshire. So we go up as far as Whitby, so the top of North Yorkshire, down to Lincoln with our own vehicles across to Sheffield. And through an acquisition that we made last year, we now deliver into the sort of the far depths of West Yorkshire into the Calder Valley, which is quite far for us. And then through some of the larger pub companies, it's nationally available from time to time with promotions. We have exported for the last 10 years. So we've supplied an Italian customer for the last 10 years. 2015, we first went out there. Northern Italy, so we ship some out there quite frequently, and Sweden as well. So we've got some cask beer going out to Sweden.
So hold on a minute. So your beer, which basically stays mainly in Yorkshire, is also available in Italy and Sweden. I'm fascinated. How did this come about?
With the Italian customers, it was really interesting, actually, because you get spam emails, don't you? You get emails all the time. We just won a World Beer Award. I think it was 2014, 2013, 2014, something like that. I put a beer in the World Beer Awards, a best bitter, Frothingham Best. And I got a phone call from a customer to say, you won the best beer in the world. I said, you what? And he said, you won the best beer in the world. Anyway, I looked it up and we'd won the World Beer Awards, we'd won the best bitter in the world, up to something like 5%. I can't quite remember what it was. I wrote a little press release and I sent it out saying that I'd entered this award and I'd completely forgotten I'd entered it, which was actually true because I forgot until the publican rang me up. And it went viral because the internet wasn't as prominent even in 2013. A guy in Italy saw it. He emailed us. I got in touch with the Department of International Trade and said, look, this guy's got in touch, his business is this. Have you heard of him? And people in Italy said, no. He's put that much information down in terms of his VAT number and some import number or something, but he's pretty genuine. And lo and behold, it was a couple of brothers who've set up a new business, and we've been dealing with for the last 10 years. I've got to Italy probably every year. I've done beer festivals. I've done beer tastings on canals in Livorno, which is a bit like a mini Venice. I've done all sorts of things out there. Bizarrely, the best-selling beer that we have out there is a best bitter, because the hipsters in Italy like something different. And to them, a best bitter is very, very different. Whereas here it's the norm.
They're not going to have many best bitters in Italy, are they?
Well, the craft Italian craft brewers that do brew them, I've been to beer festivals there when they say, come try our best bitter, what do you think? And they'll make a really good representation of a best bitter. However, they usually ram loads of American hops in it. Doesn't particularly, it looks like them. And they might even have a Union Jack on the pump badge, but they just don't quite get the taste there. And sometimes the yeast is not really the yeast that you'd use for a best bitter. So best bitter is our best-selling beer in northern Italy. So
you've got kind of cult status in various parts of Europe then.
I don't know about that. They'll do treat you like royalty, actually, when you go out there. It is really quite nice. And, we've done some really interesting things out there. And actually, the last time my son went, sees obviously our head brewer now, and I thought it was interesting for him to go. And some of the beer culture out there is really, really interesting. Really interesting. Some lovely people out there making some really, really good beers. And lots of familiar British beers, especially in northern Italy. They do seem to have a passion for good British beer.
Well, you live and learn, don't you, Dave?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to extend that theme a little bit more, do you take the beer there yourself, or how do you get it there?
So we just ship it there. It's palletised.
And is that easy these days?
Not as easy since Brexit. Initially, before that, pre-Brexit, to send beer to Italy was almost as easy as if I sent some to yourselves. The paperwork was pretty straightforward. But we have had a couple of issues, especially last year, where shipments of one of the I's has not been quite dotted or the T's crossed, and it's delayed things a little bit. But interestingly, they want to serve a beer that would be in just the way that it would be served in a British pub. So they imagine it be completely flat. So up north, like we are in Yorkshire, we like to see a head on our beer. But there, they like to see it almost completely flat, as if we were in the east end of London having a pint. That's what they like. So we send it out there in poly kegs, but we try not to have as little carbonation in there as possible. And we send it over there, and they dispense it from a poly keg through a beer engine, and it goes pretty well.
Wow. Well, this wasn't a conversation I thought we'd be having tonight. Fascinating.
We haven't even gone to Sweden yet either. So how did Sweden come about then?
There's a couple of things with that. We initially sent some beer up through Sweden. There's a guy, an expat, who lives in Sweden, and he does supply a number of specialist beer pubs he will send casks out. And we'll get an order next week for about 39s that we'll have to have it at a certain warehouse on a certain date. It'll get shipped out, and then in 3 months' time, I'll get a call to say there's some empties to pick up from a warehouse in West Yorkshire, and it works like that, and it works pretty well. And then sort of through the acquisition we made last year of another brewery's brand, they're already sending some beer out to Sweden, so we do send some out through that as well. So yeah.
We've covered some very different ground already. What we haven't really done, actually, is properly talk about the beer yet. Now, you've got Select Dust as well, Dave.
I always end up saying this. I just drink it while we drink it, and now it's gone. So obviously very drinkable. So this is the blonde you've touched on, which is 3.8%. Very fruity, very light, little bit dry, keeps you going back, and goes down very easily, very quickly. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I think so. Somebody once told me that you need to brew a beer that people aren't thinking about when they're drinking it. They're just having a good time. They're socialising with their friends in the pub, and they're just having a beer that they're just enjoying without having to think too much about it. And I think that's what we try to do with this. It's a social beer. It's a beer that you're in the pub with your mates, and you're enjoying it, and you're having some banter and chewing the cud. Should I say? And that's the sort of beer it is. And this is the original brew. This was beer number 1, and it's been our bestseller ever since then. And it's, most of what we do is that one beer.
I think what we've just said there is very fair. We talk on this podcast about all sorts of beers. Some of them, ridiculous sours, huge stouts, and there's lots going on with those beers. This is just a beer, like you say, you can sit in the pub with your mates, drink 3 or 4 pints and not have to think about it. It's not a challenging beer at all.
Yeah, and I think I once had an interesting chat with another brewer. He visited the brewery about something else and came to see us, and we got to know him, and he said one day, I wish we had a beer like your Select Dust, or, you know, quite a lot of beers that breweries have got, a blonde or a pale, about that strength, that they're bread and butter beer, if you like, because he said they were quite creative and they brewed lots of really interesting beers, but they didn't have one go-to flagship, if you like. And I think we've been lucky with that. So most of the pubs around here where we will supply beer week in, week out, the majority of them will have this beer. If we ever have somebody contact us for a party or a wedding, we'll always point them in the direction of this, because we know that it ticks most boxes. It wins few awards. Very rarely does it win awards, because one, it's a competitive market, and two, sometimes I think the award-winning beers are the ones that are really almost unusual, if you like. We do a licorice stout, actually, which we do, and it wins loads of awards because, well, the flavoured stout category is not lush with different beers, so they go after wins. But, you know, that's the sort of thing you'll find with a beer like this. But again, for us, it's the one that we sell lots of.
In terms of percentage of your production, what percentage does Select Dust make up?
So this is 60% of everything we do is this one beer. So we're brewing once or twice a week. You know, it's consistent. And, you know, it's the one thing I always say to people: if there's ever a time we've got a pinch point in production, or you know, something occurs, we cannot run out of this beer. Like the last, if you do that, then there's serious trouble. We've got to make sure we've always got it available. So that's key. It's always there.
My first beer I had was Cold Snap, which is hoppy lager, and I would say it does all the things that you said about being very straightforward, nice and easy to drink. It's quite a crisp lager. However, it's 5.2%, and I could do exactly the same as Dave said there and sit and have a few pints of it. And I think if I did that if it was on cask or something, I might be in a little bit of trouble at the end of it.
Strictly, it's not a lager. So we do use a brewery consultant still now to come on site and just as an outsider looking in, just to make sure that everything gets done correctly, and we're still keeping consistency. And we once chatted to him about brewing it originally, and he said he called it, if you don't mind me saying, a bastard lager. He said it's a bastardization of lager, because we're using lager malt, German lager hops, but we're using our good old ale yeast in the process. And I don't think the yeast comes through enough to take it away from a lager. And we didn't want to make something at the time that was bland, so we had more hops in there, more middle fruit hops in there than what we would have done if it was going to be a very commercial lager, if you like. I'm not an expert on lagers, if I'm honest, and I've always struggled with finding a description for that beer. So we've called it a hoppy lager, but it may yet tick it's not quite a Hell's, I don't know, but it does go well. We do a couple of lagers in bottles here, actually. I do think lagers really underrated, because a really good lager is something to behold.
It is difficult to pin it into any particular lager style, and we did an episode recently where we talked a lot about lager, and I don't think it quite matches any of those ones. So perhaps it is almost like an Anglo-Saxon lager or something. It works really well. But as we sort of alluded to when we started talking about those beers, and you've mentioned a couple of times, last year you made an acquisition. You'll be able to tell us better, but you took another brewery on, essentially. So you also have another brewery name, but it's brewed on site with yourself.
We were familiar with another brewery in the side of West Yorkshire called Little Valley. It was run and set up actually by a couple, Vin and Sue. Vin was is a master brewer, he's a Dutch gentleman, and Sue sort of the marketing and the sales force behind the business. And they had a lovely little business. They had stuck by their guns, and they were organic brewers, brewed organic beer. And Sue and I used to chat on the phone actually quite often about mutual customers, just about things in general, even though geographically we were quite far apart. But we did work with a few customers that were the same, and we'd just share information and just chat about things, chat about the industry in general. And she came and got in touch with me in November 23 to say that they were looking to downsize, and would we be interested in any of the vessels that they have. Our brewery kit is made by Merschler in Germany, and you don't often see second-hand Merschler equipment about, but they had some tanks, and we were actually probably ready for an additional fermenting vessel and a couple of conditioning tanks, and so we agreed to buy them off them, and we took delivery of them in the January 24, and then in February 24 she got in touch again and said, you probably realise that we're calling it a day, we're selling up, and I had no clue, to be honest with you. I just assumed that they were downsizing. I was surprised, and I said, that's a real shame because, they make some really good beers now. I thought they had a really good business. And not long after, I had a call from one of our mutual customers who we did quite a lot of business with and said, would you be interested in taking on the brand? Because we sell quite a lot of that beer, bottled beer. They did a lot of bottles. In fact, it was predominantly bottled beer they were doing at the time. And would you be interested in taking it on? Because without it, it'll disappear. And, it's quite a lot of business to us. So I'd say we thought about it, chatted through as a family, and decided that it would be an interesting thing. It wouldn't compete too much with Great Newson beers, but it'd been organic. They supplied quite a few specialist organic retailers, which was interesting. And we agreed with them to take on the brand. We didn't take on the whole business. It was just taking on the brand. And they wound the business down, sold off the kit that they still retained, and the business is finished. But we took on the brand itself and had Vim come and work with our team to help us learn how to brew these beers so that we could keep the consistency. I mean, it's not been easy, transformation of taking on that extra work, managing stock and keeping everything consistent, all the things. And you're not dealing with a recipe that you developed. You're inheriting somebody else's recipe. So that was all interesting stuff. And so that's been nearly a year now. And so, we've got a lot of brands at the moment under our, what we're producing. And that creates plenty of challenges. But some of the customers we inherited have been really, really interesting, really good to deal with. And I'll tell you one little story, which might make you chuckle, is that I think, without offending any buyers of any businesses, as in buyers of your products, they're normally a challenging conversation to have when you're trying to sell something to them. But Sue took me to visit many of their best customers when we were above the handover period. And we went to meet an organic retailer in Manchester. And the buyer, she was waiting for us for a meeting. I stuck my hand out to shake her hand to introduce myself. And she said, "We don't shake hands here." She said, "We hug." She said, "Bring it in." And so we had a hug, and that's the first time I've had such a warm welcome from a buyer. And that was not the only business that worked with their suppliers in that way, which had been really a pleasant surprise. So we're running 2 brands, doing everything here for the Little Valley brand. So there's all the challenges of being certified organic and also how you brew commercial beer and then shift to organic, all the purging that we have to do and the cleaning we have to do between batches. So there's some interesting blurs there, and we'll still finding our feet a little bit with it, but it's been an interesting 12 months.
Do you use one bit of kit for Little Valley and another part of the kit for your stuff?
Yeah, it's all brewed on the one setup. So the biggest challenges that we have, obviously if you're brewing beer, you're cleaning your kit thoroughly anyway. Your vessels the fermenters and the tanks are all sterile before you put any beer in them anyway. So that's not a big challenge. The challenge for us is things like handling malt. So we may have 2 or 3 days of organic brewing once the kit's cleaned down, and then we'll go back to non-organic, and that's how we'll do it. We'll try and group organic beers together to make it more efficient and, work that way. And brewing the beer is just the same as brewing non-organic beer, really. It's been interesting. I won't say we've retained all the customers that they had. We've lost 1 or 2, which we expected, but, we've also kept quite a lot of the business, and we'd like to think we can grow it. And we'd also like to do more cask.
I suppose the easiest way to know how that's going is, you sort of touched on it there, there was an existing customer base, and if they're getting the product when it's come from you as opposed to where it's coming from before and they're still happy, then that shows you're on the right path, I guess. If it is easy to put sort of a rough number on it, if non-organic costs X, how much more does Y cost at the pump?
Yeah, so if I give you an example, that a bottle of beer in our little shop at the brewery here, $2.60 for a bottle of Great Newson beer, 500ml bottle. And I think we're charging 15 pence more for an organic bottle.
I mean, when it started with a 2, I was amazed, to be honest.
Yeah. With the Little Valley brand, how many different beers sit within that brand?
When we first took it on, there was, crikey, it was a 6, 7, I think. And we've dropped one of them. There was a coconut stout that we dropped. We didn't feel it sold that well. And also to source the organic coconut extract was unfeasibly expensive. And there might be a couple of others that, we might have to sort of say, well, look, they're just not selling well enough. And as I say, the majority of what we're selling is in bottle. What we decided to do this year is to bring them on in rotation. So maybe do one for 2 months and just see how it sells. And then next year we'll re-examine it. We might bring one on permanently. It just depends, and just sit it alongside the Great Newson range.
if you wanted to tweak one of the recipes, the Little Valley recipes, have you got to go back to the owners, the original owners, and seek their approval?
No, we own the brand, we own the recipes. Yeah, we own everything. Now, the biggest challenge we have found, it's worth just mentioning, is, so for example, the beers, the great news in beers that brewing all the time, and many brewers will agree with this, but especially with hops, you've always got to make sure you've got a consistent supply of a hop for a beer. So I suppose, for example, with Oakham Citra, if they didn't get their Citra contract in place to ensure they got supply for the next year, and all of a sudden they last minute decided we need X amount of Citra, and the merchant says, I'm sorry, but there's none left. There's been a bad harvest, or we've sold out and there isn't any. You'd be in trouble. Now, we're finding with organic beers is that because of the very nature of them being organic, and they're sort of more susceptible to disease and climate and what have you, because you can't spray them, they're organic, that we are finding even now that some of the hops that in the recipes that we were given, there is very, very limited supply of them. And so we are at the moment just doing some trial brews for next year on hops that we know we can get hold of, and they're organic, but they're going to have to be a very close match to the ones that are in there, because the ones that are in the recipe, there is such a limited supply of them. And that's what the merchants are telling us. So having to do a bit of adapting that way without changing the beer significantly. And that's a big challenge. And I think it's just one of those things you've got to accept with organic products. Sometimes the seasons will go against, you can't spray for something and a disease might get into the crop. And it's just one of those things, and that's what you've got to accept. So that's something that we've had to look at, and we're having to accept. So it's a bit of trial brewing going on with that at the moment.
And don't talk about the beer quickly. I'm just interested there when you said about the organic hops and which ones get used. Are they a bit more like you wouldn't see them in non-organic beers very much, or is it just there's not many hops are done both ways, if that makes sense?
So many of the hops that we're dealing with are ones that you'd be familiar with. So Organic Cascade is one. We do that, and that's one. There's Brewer's Gold, an organic version of that. Organic Sovereign, which is a British hop. Pacific Gem. So they're all familiar names. One of the problems that we have found is that there is one hop, and I forget which one it was. It was a US hop. We were told that the organic accreditation people have stopped this hop being used, or it can be accepted as an organic hop because of the small area where it was grown in the US. Something's happened. Either somebody sprayed them, or they've got some drift from a neighbouring hop yard, and we cannot use them in the beers anymore this year. So there is a bit of a question over some of the hops, certainly from the US. That's what I've been led to believe. So we're having to maybe look at alternatives. So New Zealand do produce some organic hops that have got sort of US hop characteristics, if you like. The UK, again, is our maritime climate doesn't lend itself to growing organic hops really all that well because of the damp, moist, humid climate that we've got. Although we do use Sovereign. So there's those challenges there really that we've got to look at, and just accept that sometimes we've just got to sort of maybe blend in some other hops to eke out supplies, or replace a hop altogether just to get a good match if we can get it.
Which beer did you go for from Little Valley, Dave? Try and get you before we finished it all.
Yeah, getting quick. So I had the Withens Pale, which is 4.2% light and hoppy pale. What it is, it's light and hoppy. Again, very drinkable. What I find interesting is that this is an organic beer. If you gave me this, I wouldn't be able to say, oh, yeah, that's an organic beer. Can people tell a difference?
I don't think so personally. I don't think so on a taste level. I think there's too many similarities. No, I mean, with that beer that you mentioned is mostly organic lager malt. There is a touch of wheat in there, organic wheat malt and organic Vienna malt. It's quite a pretty standard recipe. It has got Pacific Gem hops in it and Organic Cascade, but they are very lightly hopped. It's a very lightly hopped beer. It's only, it's not whacking you in the face. It's like you said, it's very drinkable. But I don't think on the whole you can taste the difference. I think it's probably a ethical thing that people buy them. I don't really know, maybe.
Yeah, I was going to say, it begs the question, what makes people buy an organic beer if there is no taste difference? Because if you buy an organic sausage over a non-organic sausage, you can often tell the difference, can't you? But with this, you can't.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And to be honest, we're pretty well read up on this sort of thing on the farm here. We're sort of moving down not an organic route, but what we would call a regenerative farming route. So we're looking after soil health. And if you read up a lot on this, there is a lot of evidence to suggest that food that's grown organically and regeneratively can often taste better because some of the healthy chemicals that are in it actually do align with flavour. Whereas, sometimes you pick up a tomato from a well-known supermarket and it'd be quite bland, but if you pick one from your own greenhouse or whatever, it can have a real punch. Some of the beers that with the recipes we inherited are really quite clever. There's a stout that we do, that's Doodley Stout, which is really quite a really good stout, and we've been really quite impressed with it. And the Dalek King's another one, which unfortunately we don't sell loads of, but it's almost a Belgian pale, which uses a Belgian ale yeast, which is something very different to what we've done before. And I think that's a really good beer. We really like that.
Yeah, it segues nicely in then, because that's what I'm having now. I think you could call it a Belgian single. And whenever I see a Belgian single being advertised by a non-Belgian brewer, I would turn my nose up a little bit, because I find that it might smell a bit Belgian, but that's generally about it. And then it's actually quite bland. This isn't. Can straight away smell the Belgian yeast. We're talking about yeast a whole conversation tonight, but I can smell the Belgian yeast, but it tastes very Belgian and very classically Belgian, nice and hoppy, a little bit fruity. It's 5%. It's really quite a classical beer. It's a shame it doesn't, like you say, it doesn't sell as well as it perhaps should, because for me it's a really good beer. I'm really impressed with this one.
I think maybe it's the definition to a Yorkshire audience of a Belgian beer that maybe people find it unusual. But if ever we were to do a tasting here or go and do a tasting somewhere, I would always bring that beer to give people that opportunity to try something. It's very different to what, the ingredients are pretty much the same as many of the other beers. But when you start adding that mix of a Belgian ale yeast in there, it can really, as you know, you can really change the characteristics and the flavour. And it's a really interesting beer.
I'm fascinated now. So what does the future hold for you and Great Newsom and Little Valley? Where do you want to take these breweries in the next 18 months, 2 years? Or are you just happy where they are? Is there any aspirations to grow them further?
I think there's a number of challenges that we're all facing at the moment in this industry. What does concern me is the number of pubs that we've lost or we're losing. So I'm a bit hesitant sometimes to say, we're just going to grow and grow and grow, because I think our kit at the moment, the plant we've got, the kit we've got, I think that should serve us well now. We installed that in 2020. We've added tanks we bought from Little Valley. And I think now, if we were brewing that flat out, we would have a lot of beer. I think things on that point of view are going quite well at the moment. I think for me, the concern is, going back to the pubs, is trying to establish a market for your product. So I suppose even if you own your own pubs, you're not guaranteed a market because people might not visit them. But we have never owned any of our own pubs or bars. We don't have a brewery tap. That's sort of a thought on our minds. We're in the middle of nowhere, but then COVID happened and we were flat out. Myself and my wife hired a motorhome. We went round the west coast of Scotland just to get a break. We went round Loch Fyne in the middle of nowhere on a rainy Sunday afternoon in September to come across a sign for Fine Ales, and we went down this gravel track.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Really? Yeah. And those people sat out under, bear in mind you had to distance yourself from people in September 2020. Yeah. But there were people drinking beer in the middle of nowhere. And I thought, well, if people come here, I'm sure they'll come to us. So we have the original brewery building, which we don't use anymore. So the idea is that we'd love people to come here and actually enjoy a beer on site. We'd love to develop that more. We'd love to, the thought of having some sort of outlets would be something that's interested, although I have no intentions of ever wanting to run a pub. That sort of thing, really. And just really consolidate what we're doing. I really enjoy the export side. We met some lovely people through working with the people in Italy. I'd love to try and do a little bit more of that. I think a lot of it's doing what you're doing really well. Because we're involved in farming, there's always the talk of succession and what comes next and the future. And people ask you, why have you started another business? And really, I think a lot of it was for future family members if they wanted to be involved. And as I said, my eldest son was never interested in brewing. We put a brewery in 2020, the new one. He never even looked twice at it. But then our head brewer left in 21. And he just said to me, Dad, do you know, I fancy having a go at this. And there was really no nepotism. I just said to him, look, if you couldn't have a go, and I had to take over a brewery for a short period of time because our head brewer left and we hadn't got a replacement. And James has actually thrown himself into it in a big way. In fact, he's currently sitting his Chartered Institute of Brewers and Distillers diplomas at the moment. He's doing his first module. So he's more qualified than I am. He knows more about brewing probably than I do now. So I don't want to do something with the next 4 years in mind. I want to build something with the next 20 years in mind. So when we bought a brewing league in 2020, we bought something that I wanted it to last. We bought a German brewing league, cost us more than it would have done. This is going to be here for the long term. When I'm dead and gone and the brewing will be in my honour, then, I'll be quite pleased, I maybe won't be here to drink it. But, it's that sort of thing. It was sort of longer term while people still want to drink beer, we want to be here doing it. And I think that's a big part of what we want to do.
That's a really good answer. And some people believe that if you have a tap room, you've got to have a lot of footfall, you've got to put it in the right place. I don't necessarily believe that. I think if you have an amazing tap room, people will come to it. It can be in the middle of nowhere and people will come, as long as you offer something that they can't get elsewhere.
And we're on a conversation where all three people have been to Fine Ales, and all independently, not because, neither one of us said to the other, oh, you've got to go. We did it on our own things and both went and loved it. And I went for my honeymoon. You went as part of a trip around Scotland, a bit like Matt, actually, wasn't it? It was a camper van type thing. And Dave, you have nothing bound on your relative doorstep, and that is a barn in the middle of nowhere in Worcestershire, and it is packed out every weekend, isn't it?
And Rivington, would be the same as well.
It's the build it and they will come mantra, isn't it?
A lot of people think it doesn't work anymore. I really do think it does still work.
If the product's good enough. And the product is good enough in this case, 100%.
Well, it's very kind of you to say so. I'm in agreement with you both in many ways. We've run a festival here every year for the last few years on barring COVID, and this year it took so much out of us last year that this year we decided to have a break, and people love to come out, pitch a tent, have a few beers, listen to music, some food, have a bit of fun, and it just sure that people will come, and they're not all local. They do travel for other places as well, and it is interesting. I think you've probably hit the nail on the head there. People will travel if it's worth coming for. And again, we've nothing like it around here at all. There are no brewery taps for I don't know where the nearest one is, if I'm honest. So yeah, good point.
Get it open. I'll come.
I think the beers will sell themselves. It gets used as a horrible word almost sometimes in craft beer. Dave and I go backwards and forwards on this because we don't necessarily think it's a good term necessarily for it anymore. The beers we've had tonight with you, yes, they would be more traditionally rooted, but it doesn't mean they're not crafted, and they are really good beers, and they might not be all singing, all dancing, hoppy things where we're trying to pick out 3 or 4 different things, but they're super drinkable. We both had our beers really quick, haven't we, Dave? Really enjoyed them. I'd have them again.
If I could go to my local pub tomorrow night and I saw these beers on, I'd be all over it.
Yeah, same.
I think, again, it comes back to the early sort of lesson that we got in brewing. One was keep it simple. The KISS principle. And that really has put us in better stead, I think, for doing that. And again, listening to the customer. Really do listen to the customer or the consumer, I suppose, in this case, because, at the end of the day, we could do something just for the sake of it. It go down like a lead balloon. We've got 10 employees here. We've got to make sure that money's coming in, and we keep the business rolling. And I've got to rein the brewer in sometimes, or brewers, when it comes to brewing beers and writing recipes. I think ask yourself the question: will it sell? Because that's the most important thing. Again, developing recipes, we always involve our salespeople. So Wendy and Stephanie, who sell the beer for us, we always involve them. Put the recipe and the beer design past them, because they're the ones at the coalface selling it, and are going to make sure that we can do that, because otherwise it's not worth doing.
Well, we've been drinking lots of beers as usual, but which was the best since our last episode? This is tried and tested. Dave, what have you been enjoying drinking?
I have been drinking a lot of Fest beers, which do start to blend into one. That's kind of been my stock beer. I seem to have lapsed into drinking a lot of German stuff, which is good, but not necessarily very exciting at times. But I did have some different things, and nothing more so than when, again, funnily enough, mentioned them already, I was in Hopsters the original, the OG shop in Ipswich for a NFL fantasy draft for those who like their things like that, which I certainly do. There was a beer in there which I've been eyeing up, and my friend kindly got it for me, and it is Jeff Was a Race Car Driver, which is a dipper, and it's from two breweries I'd never have heard of or had anything from. Hoppy People, which is in Switzerland, and Superstition Meadery, which is in Arizona. So it's an interesting collaboration. So it's dry hopped with Audacia, Simcoe, Eldorado, Citra, and honey, which would be the meadery element. And it was just a big, full, sticky dipper. You know, it took a bit of drinking, 8.8%, and it didn't hide it. And it was just one of those ones where I'd sort of eyed it up, and you get these beers from time to time. You sort of see it and think, cool, I'd like it. And then I sort of thought, oh, God, it's going to come with a bit of a price tag. Do I really want to have it? And then, like I say, was very kindly had it bought for me, and it was actually really worth it. Always satisfying when that sort of comes off.
Some of these dippers who have said this before can be a bit too sort of sweet and cloying, but I take it this wasn't.
No, this wasn't sweet. This was just big, full. It wasn't that sort of one where you get that sweetness at first, which you sort of think, oh, that's quite nice. And then after a while, it gets a bit much. No, this was just big, full, boozy.
Excellent. I've had a couple of dippers recently, but my tried and tested isn't a dipper. It is a New England hazy. Plenty of them around, market saturated with them. And you speak to brewers and they say, we make them because this is what people want to drink. And yeah,
Exactly.
and we drink them as well. But this one is from a brewery called Trouble Brewing in the Republic of Ireland. Now, I've been having a few beers from Ireland recently. Had a little box brought over for me from Dublin, and this was in there. It's called Ambush New England Hazy Pale, 5%. And if all New Englands tasted like this, the world would be a very happy place. This was perfect. Everything came together, really well balanced, no bitterness, thick, fruity, pillowy, all those words. This was perfect. And I've been really impressed with the beers I've had in that box from the Republic of Ireland. I probably could have picked out 2 or 3 of them, but that's the one that sticks in my mind the most. Do you think it's something to do with the water quality over there?
Potentially. This is something we actually tried to get off the ground, wasn't it? Doing a Republic of Ireland brew to me. And we found it really difficult for whatever reason to get the breweries to talk to us, whereas Northern Ireland was a cinch.
I think it's because you can't readily get their beers.
Which is daft in itself, isn't it?
But if we can, I would love to do an episode focusing on the Republic. The beers I've had have been wonderful, and if there's more and more like that, I'd be very happy.
Daftaboutcraft, brought to you with mosaic board print, makers of supreme beer mats.
It's time for some Any Other Beersness now on Daftaboutcraft. And, I'm joined by Tim Weaver, a.k.a. the Brand Weaver. But he's not here to talk about brand weaving tonight. He's here to talk about something else. And he's joined by Will from Birdhouse Brewery. Good evening, both of you.
Good evening, Dave.
Now, Tim, what are you doing here? Tell us what's going on.
Outside of doing all the branding for brewery stuff that I do in my own podcast, I'm also closely connected with the London Brewers Alliance. And we're here to talk about 15 years of epic London beers and London breweries.
The LBA is such a core part of all of those breweries' existence and what they've done for the industry over the past 15 years, which has been a time of change and development. And yeah, it's been a roller coaster, let's put it that way. But I'll hand over to Tim to tell a bit more about the LBA itself.
Cheers, man. It was formed in 2010, a group of really passionate brewers kind of going, hold on a second, there's a couple of breweries around here. Maybe we should collaborate. Maybe we should share ideas. And now up to this point where there are nearly 80 London breweries who are members. Not only that, but you've got a load of trade members who support. And it's all about championing breweries within the M25, that idea of bringing together knowledge, sharing ideas, collaborating to benefit the breweries. But then the LBA's responsibility is to help make more people aware of it and collaborate and get the great beer out there. I mean, London's got such a rich brewing history that there is so much to tap into.
I'm fascinated to hear that there are that many breweries, the London area. I knew there was a lot, but I didn't know there was that many. And I don't think a lot of our listeners will appreciate that.
No, I mean, people will be familiar with the Black Horse Beer Mile and Bermondsey Beer Mile, but that really just scratches the surface of the amount of talent that you can find out there. And if you go to the London Brewers website, if you go to our Instagram page, you'll find all the breweries on there. And we're going to be doing so much more about promoting those breweries, trying to get people out to them and enjoying them. There's a huge amount of beer that you can find in London directly from the breweries.
Give us a few names from breweries that our listeners might not be so familiar with. We know the big names, but what about some smaller ones?
Will, what do you reckon? Give us a couple.
Let me I'll just reel off the ones that come to my lips first. We've got Broccoli Brewery, we've got 40 Foot, we've got Firkin Brewery, we've got Anspach and Hobday, slightly larger. We've got Distortion, Super Cute. It's funny, like a lot of these breweries, if you look at when the LBA started 15 years ago and wrote a list, if you did a sort of comparison of which ones were actually there when the LBA started, I think you'd find that there's actually very few that were actually there at that time. A lot of those breweries have taken on, a bit like us, for example, where we took on a site where there was a brewery prior to us, but a lot of those breweries have changed hands and evolved as well. It's a really interesting mix. Got breweries like Brixton Brewery who have ridden a wave of going into the mega echelons of the beer world in terms of volumes. Then you've got smaller breweries like ourselves who only opened up a year and a half ago and sell exclusively to the sort of local on-trade market. It's a real diverse group, but hopefully a good reflection of all the different angles of modern beer and everything that comes with it. London Beer Lab, they're another local one who you may not have heard of.
I'm loving it. There are names here that I don't know. I spend so much time scouring Instagram, trying to find these breweries that not many people know about. So to hear a few names that I'm not familiar with, I love that. That's awesome.
I'll send you a link, Dave, which goes to the LBA's members page. But there's also a Google map there. So if anyone ever wants to sort themselves out with a little tour,
this is going to blow my mind, isn't it?
You're going to need a long bank holiday bender on this, man.
So if I'm a brewery in the London area, what can the LBA do for me?
Well, why don't you kind of chime in from a brewery perspective?
We are a brewery that opened up a year and a half ago. I previously was brewing in Edinburgh before, and the business as it was up to date was a bar business. So in terms of nose to the ground in the beer, in the local scene, we were newbies and we were coming at it fresh. And one thing that was amazing for us was having the LBA there with their quarterly events that they organised. So that was bringing together basically all of the London brewers, and would typically get 50 plus brewers from all over London there at one of the tap rooms. And that was such a great opportunity to meet people. In the first session, they did a big intro for us and we got to kind of introduce ourselves and things. And it's sort of off the back of that, which I feel when you are a small brewer and small brewery and you're running a small production facility, it's just pretty new. Things happen which mean you have to rely on your neighbours a lot. And for me, a lot of those relationships, which I now count on, or people that I now consider friends in the brewing industry, they were all formed from those times that I got to meet those people at the LBA events.
Essentially a big support network then.
Yeah, I'd say so. To go on top of what Will was talking about, there is it being an active community. There's a really busy WhatsApp group that has everyone in it. If there's a quick emergency where can anyone recommend someone who can get to me today to help out with this? Or has anyone got one of these? Or I've got a few spare ones of these. Does anyone want to take them off my hands? It's great. Equally, the LBA gets kind of preferential treatment to some festivals and events. So, for example, London Craft Beer Fest.
We were on that bar and exactly the thing. We didn't have the resources, but it was a treat for us to be able to pour through the LBA bar. But also we bought tanks and brewery equipment from other breweries. And actually one, for example, was Howling Hops through that WhatsApp group. We have recently bought 2 big lagering tanks from them. Yeah, but a couple of other great ways that we've been interacting with the LBA.
When you're a small brewery or a small operation, you often don't have time to go out and make those relationships with other people in other breweries. But the LBA is sort of that middleman, that link to all these resources. I love that.
Training events as well. Like Will was talking about at the quarterly meetups, not only do you have the community and the casual chats and the networking, but each event will start with a training session. So that be that on, quality, production, operations. There will always be a specialist who's invited to run a training session then before going into the main networking piece. So constantly trying to build up the knowledge and help in any way that the LBA can.
Thank you very much for that. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks so much.
Daftaboutcraft, powered by Craft Brew Festival.
Get in touch with us on Twitter and Instagram at Daftaboutcraft1